Hello, I'm Phyllis Swindell.
And I'm Andre LaDouche. Phyllis and I are product liability lawyers at the law firm of Swindell and LaDouche LLP.
If you, or a loved one, have been injured, maimed, or killed due to the actions of another person, you may have legal rights to compensation. That's
right, Phyllis. Swindell and LaDouche is filing a class action product liability lawsuit against God Almighty, LLC, the designer and manufacturer of a dangerously defective product. Mankind.
In Genesis chapter 6, verse 7, God acknowledges creating man, but immediately self-incriminates, admitting grief for having created a defective product.
God pinpoints the nature of the defect in Genesis chapter 6, verse 5, describing it as the inclination for evil, found in the hearts of men.
The inclination of man to engage in evil is analogous to the inclination of a Toyota Prius to engage in sudden acceleration. Both tendencies suggest a fundamental design flaw, where the risk of injury and damage remains elevated until the manufacturer corrects their error.
The Bible records God's attempt to correct the defect, announcing a worldwide recall covering the entire production run of mankind. You may know this recall by its more informal name, Noah's flood. As explained in Genesis 7, verse 1, God exempted Noah and his 7 family members from the recall, after personally examining their hearts, declaring them to be righteous, free from the defect.
Unfortunately, God's skills for character assessment proved to be flawed, as he apparently failed to detect the defect in the family of Noah. They were, in fact, carrying the deleterious defect in their hearts, with evil as a stowaway on board the ark. So despite drowning all living beings on the face of the earth, including innocent animals and children, the defect survived God's attempt to eradicate it.
Sensing another dismal failure on his hands, God expresses regret for having carried out the ill-conceived recall, washing his hands of the entire matter by disavowing all responsibility for man's evil. This is shown in Genesis 8:21, where God throws in the towel, saying, "Evil is an intrinsic property of man that emerges during his childhood." God speaks as if his omnipotent hands are tied, or that an omniscient God somehow failed to anticipate this outcome.
If the words of Genesis 8:21 sound familiar, it's because they're the same words God originally used to justify the flood, back in Genesis 6:5. He now uses these words as an excuse for failure, as if to say, "Oh, well, I tried my best, I really did, but it is what it is."
And just like that, God called off the incomplete recall, creating rainbows as a symbol of his stubborn refusal to finish the job he started. God even blessed imperfect Noah and his sons, telling them to fill the earth with their equally defective offspring. Kudos, mission accomplished. Now we know where W got the idea for hanging that banner, prematurely declaring victory in Iraq.
God's continued denial of having any duty to fix his defective products has resulted in relentless suffering for millions of innocent victims, even to this day.
So, in summary, God discovered, and publicly acknowledged, the existence of a defect, and promptly initiated a recall. But when the recall failed, God backpedaled, claiming the defect wasn't actually a defect per se, but an acceptable, naturally occurring product variation. God thus lowered the bar, relaxing quality control standards, such that future recalls would not be required.
According to God, man's capacity for wickedness is part of his nature, as if God intended for the trait to be present from man's inception. Therefore, the inclination for evil should not be thought of as a bug or a defect, but as an unadvertised product feature. God is thus paraphrasing the immortal words of the ancient Greek philosopher, Pee Wee Herman, in effect saying, "I meant to do that."
Who does God think he is, Steve Jobs, except wearing a black turtleneck robe, with a reality distortion field halo?
As the old saying goes, it's a poor craftsman indeed who blames his tools or his crafts when they fail to meet standards. Apparently God is not a big fan of personal responsibility, acting like a petulant child who blames others for his failures.
God's arrogant actions and inculpatory statements are an absolute dream come true for lawyers, serving as a smoking gun, a clear-cut admission of guilt.
For the past 2 millennia, God seems to be laying low, as if waiting for the brouhaha to pass. He appears reluctant to show his almighty face on earth, which may be wise, considering the hot mess he left down here. So if he fails to appear in court, the trial will proceed in absentia.
In anticipation of his absence, all major religious institutions claiming to be God's earthly representatives have been named as co-defendants. As participants in God's little money laundering, tax sheltering scheme, they've benefited from unjust enrichment. Therefore, we will petition the court for liens to be placed against their assets to fund the settlement pool.
Swindle and LaDouche will seek awards for our attorneys' fees, no doubt making us wealthy beyond our wildest dreams.
Any remaining funds will be divided amongst class members, with compensation distributed in the form of church vouchers, offering a 20% discount on purchases of Bibles and other religious paraphernalia. While it admittedly doesn't sound like much, remember, the class potentially contains billions of humans.
But to get the ball rolling, we need you to call now. Remember, there are deadlines to file claims, so don't delay. Call 1-800-SUE Yahweh. That's 1-800-783-9494.
And as an added bonus, the first 100 callers will receive 2 coupons for 10% off child's admission to the Ark Encounter and Creation Museum in Williamstown, Kentucky. So call now, as operators are standing by.